My mother called me a failure on the day I graduated. Not privately, not in the car, not after the ceremony. She said it in front of my classmates. If you've ever smiled while something inside you quietly broke, then stay with me. And before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and tell me the city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because moments like this happen more often than people admit. My name is Danielle Mercer. I was 22 years old, wearing a navy blue cap and gown that felt too stiff around the shoulders. Standing on the campus lawn with a diploma I had worked for years for. My degree wasn't glamorous. Business administration. Not medicine like my cousin. Not law like my older brother. But it was mine. The ceremony had just ended. Families flooded the courtyard. Cameras flashed. Laughter floated in warm May air. I found my mother near the fountain. She wasn't smiling. "Congratulations," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was flat. My father shook my hand. My brother, Lucas, stood beside them in a tailored gray suit, already talking about his upcoming internship at a Manhattan firm. "You should have tried harder," Mom added quietly. I thought I misheard her. "What?" She didn't lower her voice. "You could have done more, Danielle. You've always settled." Settled? My classmates were 5 feet away. One of my professors passed behind us. I felt heat climb up my neck. "I worked hard," I said carefully. "For average," she replied. Lucas shifted awkwardly. "Mom, she needs to hear it," Mom interrupted. "The world doesn't reward mediocrity." Mediocrity. The word landed harder than failure would have, because failure implies effort. Mediocrity implies smallness. "I graduated with honors," I said quietly. "In business," she replied, as if the field itself were a compromise. I remember the sound of someone popping a champagne bottle behind us, the way sunlight hit the fountain water. The way my hands felt suddenly too empty. My best friend Kayla approached, smiling brightly. "Danielle." "Photo." I turned toward her. Forced a smile. Mom adjusted my cap slightly. "Try not to waste this," she whispered before the camera clicked. Waste. That was the word that stayed with me for years. On the drive home, no one mentioned it. Lucas talked about his New York apartment search. Dad discussed market trends. Mom scrolled her phone. I stared out the window. That was the day I learned something about my role in the family. Lucas was the investment. I was the backup plan. And backup plans aren't celebrated. They're tolerated. That summer, I moved to Chicago with 2 suitcases and a job offer at a mid-sized logistics firm. Not prestigious, not flashy, but real. I didn't tell my mother how much I cried that first month. I didn't tell her how many interviews I bombed before landing that position. Because she had already decided what I was. Average, settled, failure adjacent. She never used the word failure again. But she didn't need to. It echoed on its own. 6 years later, I was standing in a glass elevator inside the headquarters of Mercer and Dalton Logistics, the company I helped build from regional to national scale. My office was on the 19th floor. I had 84 employees under my division. I had signed a partnership contract 2 months earlier. The brass nameplate outside my office read, "Danielle Mercer, Chief Operations Officer." The first day my mother walked into my building, she didn't recognize me. Before I tell you why she was there, and what she was carrying in her hand, let me ask you something. Have you ever been defined by a word so long that you built your life trying to outrun it? 6 years is a long time to carry a word. Failure doesn't scream, it lingers. It sits quietly in the background of every decision, every ambition, every risk you almost don't take. For me, it became fuel. The first year in Chicago was survival. Small apartment, thin walls. Instant ramen more often than I'd admit. The logistics firm I joined was barely stable. 3 partners arguing over growth direction. Outdated systems. Inefficient routes. Losing contracts. I saw inefficiency the way some people see color. It bothered me, so I stayed late. I reorganized shipment schedules. Proposed automation upgrades. Built spreadsheets no one asked for. My supervisor noticed. Not loudly, but steadily. "Mercer," he said one evening, leaning against my cubicle. "You don't think small." Small. I almost laughed at the irony. The promotion came 2 years later. Then another. Then when the company nearly folded after a bad acquisition, I volunteered to lead restructuring. It wasn't glamorous. It was brutal. 40-hour weeks became 70. I fired people. I negotiated contracts with vendors who thought I was too young. I learned to sit still in boardrooms while older men tested my patience like it was sport. I didn't tell my mother any of it. When she asked how work was going, I said, "Good." She responded, "Just don't get comfortable." Comfortable. As if stability were a weakness. Lucas, meanwhile, burned through internships like they were seasonal hobbies. Wall Street didn't reward his visionary energy the way our mother thought it would. He came home after 3 years with debt and stories. Mom said he just hadn't found the right firm yet. He was still the investment. I was still the backup. Until I wasn't. The partnership offer came unexpectedly. Mr. Dalton, the founding partner, called me into his office on a gray Thursday morning. "You've built this division," he said simply. "I just stabilized it." "You built it." 2 months later, I signed papers transferring 18% equity to my name. I didn't tell my mother immediately. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't trust her reaction. Maybe I didn't need it. The day she walked into my building, I wasn't expecting her. I was reviewing quarterly metrics when my assistant knocked softly. "There's a woman at reception asking for Danielle Mercer," she said. "That's me. She says she's your mother." My stomach tightened in a way it hadn't in years. She didn't call. No. I stood slowly, adjusted my blazer, walked toward the elevator. When the doors opened in the lobby, I saw her instantly. She looked smaller, thinner, her hair more gray than I remembered. She wore a navy pantsuit that looked like it had been chosen carefully, and in her hand was a folder. She didn't see me at first. She was speaking to the receptionist. "I have an interview with operations," she was saying. Interview. The word landed strangely. "For what?" I asked gently. She turned. Our eyes met. And for a second, she didn't recognize me. Then she did. "Danielle," she said. She looked around the lobby. At the glass walls. At the company logo. At the reception desk. "You work here?" she asked. "Yes, for." I held her gaze. "I run it." The silence between us stretched longer than it should have. She glanced at the nameplate behind the receptionist, then back at me. "You're the coup," she whispered. Yes. The word felt steady. Not triumphant, just factual. She swallowed. "I didn't know." "I know." Her fingers tightened around the folder. "I have an interview," she repeated. "For what position?" I asked. "Administrative support," she said quietly. The room shifted in my mind. Administrative support. Entry-level operations assistant. Reporting to a mid-tier manager. 3 floors below my office. I didn't feel superior. I felt disoriented. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I didn't want you to think I needed help." The irony was almost surgical. "You think I'd say that?" I asked softly. Her eyes flickered. "You always were independent." There it was again. Independent. But this time, it didn't sound like criticism. It sounded like distance. Before I tell you what happened in the conference room during her interview, and the question she asked me when she realized I was sitting at the head of the table, let me ask you something. What would you do if the person who once called you a failure suddenly needed a position in your world? I didn't escort her upstairs immediately. That would have been dramatic. Instead, I asked the receptionist to let me know when the interview began. Then I walked back to my office, closed the door, sat down. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. 6 years ago, one sentence from her had been enough to make my chest tighten for days. Now, I felt something else. Steadiness, but not indifference. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Success doesn't erase old wounds. It just gives you distance from them. At 11:02 a.m., my assistant knocked again. "They're starting." I stood. Straightened my jacket. Walked down the hallway. The conference room was glass-walled, transparent, intentional. Inside sat 3 people. Rachel from HR, Mr. Dalton, and my mother. She was answering a question when I stepped in. "I have strong organizational skills and experience handling financial paperwork." Rachel nodded. Mr. Dalton glanced at me and subtly gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. I walked in calmly, my heels clicking lightly against the floor. My mother looked up. Her expression changed. Recognition. Then realization. "You're on the panel," she asked quietly. "Yes." Mr. Dalton folded his hands. "Danielle oversees operations," he said casually. "Final approval comes through her." Final approval. The phrase settled into the room like gravity. My mother adjusted in her seat, just slightly, but enough. Rachel continued the interview professionally. "Mrs. Mercer, can you explain a time you managed multiple deadlines under pressure?" She answered, "Well," confidently. She had always been capable. That wasn't the issue. The issue had never been competence. It had been hierarchy. Midway through, Mr. Dalton asked, "Why this company?" She hesitated, then answered honestly, "I heard it's stable, stable." That word circled back like a mirror. Rachel smiled politely. "And why this position?" "I need something steady," she replied. Need. That word felt heavier now. I watched her carefully, not as a daughter. As an executive, her resume was solid. Bookkeeping experience, office management, customer service. She wasn't underqualified, but she wasn't exceptional either. And that word exceptional echoed softly in my memory. The world doesn't reward mediocrity. I felt the past brush against the present. Mr. Dalton looked toward me. "Any questions from your end, Danielle?" The room shifted. My mother's gaze locked onto mine. I could have been cruel. I could have been sharp. I could have mirrored her tone from 6 years ago. Instead, I asked calmly, "Why now?" The question wasn't on the script. Rachel glanced at me. My mother swallowed. "Your father's retirement didn't stretch as far as we thought," she said quietly, honest, direct. "And you didn't want to tell me?" I asked. She held my gaze. "No. Why?" I didn't want to seem like I failed. The word failure hovered between us. She heard it too. I didn't say it. She did. Rachel cleared her throat lightly. Mr. Dalton leaned back. The interview concluded politely. My mother stood, gathered her folder. "Thank you," she said. Professional. Controlled. She walked toward the door. Paused beside me. "You built this?" she asked softly. "Yes. How?" There it was. The question that should have been asked 6 years ago. "I didn't settle," I replied. Not sharply, just accurately. Her jaw tightened slightly, but not in anger, in reflection. "Before I tell you what happened after she left the building and the email I received that night that changed everything, I want you to think about something. If the person who once doubted you suddenly sees your world clearly, is that justice, or is that something more complicated?" I didn't make the hiring decision that afternoon. Not because I couldn't, because I needed distance. After the interview ended, I returned to my office and stared at the city through the glass wall. 6 years earlier, she had looked at me in a graduation gown and decided what I was capable of. Now she had sat across from me at a polished oak table and asked how I built something she hadn't seen coming. Success has a strange echo. It doesn't silence old words. It reframes them. At 4:32 p.m., Rachel knocked. "Strong candidate," she said. "Solid background. We could use someone experienced at that level." "At that level," I repeated. "Yes, administrative support, 3 floors below my office." I nodded. "Send the offer." Rachel blinked slightly. "You're sure?" "Yes." She studied me for a moment. "This isn't personal." "No," I said. It wasn't, not in the way revenge would have been. At 10:14 p.m., my phone buzzed, an email from my mother. Subject line, "Thank you." I stared at it for a full minute before opening. "Danielle, I don't know how to say this properly. I saw your name on the door today. I saw your office. I saw how people looked at you. And I realized I didn't see you when you were becoming this. I thought I was pushing you. I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. But I think I was projecting my own fears onto you. I'm proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it without feeling small." "Mom," I read it twice, then a third time. Not because it was poetic, because it was vulnerable. The line that stayed with me was simple. I didn't know how to say it without feeling small. That's what pride often hides. Fear of being outpaced. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of admitting you were wrong. The next morning, she accepted the offer. Her start date was Monday. I didn't prepare for that weekend emotionally, because part of me still carried that graduation courtyard, the sun, the fountain, the word mediocre. I wondered what it would feel like to walk past her desk, to see her in my building. To exist in roles neither of us had imagined. Before I tell you what happened on her first day and the sentence she said in the break room that shifted something permanently between us, let me ask you something. Can someone grow after they've hurt you? Or does the damage define them forever? My mother's first day in my building was a Monday. My mother's first day in my building was a Monday. I arrived early. Earlier than usual. Not because I was nervous. Because I wanted control. Control over how it felt. Control over how I walked past her. Control over whether I acknowledged her as mother. Or employee. The elevator doors opened onto the 12th floor at 8:41 a.m. She was already there, sitting upright at her assigned desk. New badge clipped carefully to her blazer. Hair pulled back more tightly than usual. Focused. She didn't see me at first. She was reviewing onboarding paperwork. For a second, I just watched. Not with superiority, with distance. 6 years ago, she had looked at me in a cap and gown and questioned my ambition. Now she sat inside a structure I built. Not as punishment, as reality. Rachel noticed me first. Morning, Danielle. My mother looked up. Our eyes met. There was a flicker there, not embarrassment. Awareness. Good morning, she said. Professional. Measured. Morning, I replied. The air didn't crack. It didn't tremble. It just adjusted. Throughout the morning, I heard her voice occasionally. Confident, organized. She wasn't struggling. She had always been competent. What she had underestimated was scale. Around noon, I walked into the break room. She was there alone, stirring sugar into coffee. When she saw me, she didn't stiffen. She didn't look defensive. She just looked thoughtful. Is it overwhelming? I asked lightly. She shook her head. No. Pause. It's impressive. That word carried weight. Impressive. Not average. Not safe. Impressive. I leaned against the counter. You always liked order, she said. I always liked responsibility. She studied me carefully. I didn't see how far that would take you. You didn't want to. That wasn't accusation. It was clarity. She didn't argue. I thought pushing you would make you tougher, she said. It made me quiet. That landed. She nodded slowly. I see that now. Silence settled between us. Not tense. Not unresolved. Just honest. I called you mediocre, she said quietly. Yes. I was wrong. 3 words. Direct. Not wrapped in justification. Not diluted. I was afraid, she continued. Lucas struggled, and I needed someone to be certain. So I became certainty. Yes, and you resented it. She swallowed. I think I did. The admission felt heavier than any apology. Because resentment isn't easy to confess. You built something I didn't predict, she said. I built it because you didn't. That wasn't sharp. It was structural. She exhaled softly. I should have celebrated you. Yes, and I didn't. No. She looked down at her coffee. I'm sorry. There it was. Not in an email. Not typed safely from a distance. Spoken. In a room where I held authority. And yet I didn't feel powerful. I felt balanced. Before I tell you what happened 3 months later when she stood in my office during a company-wide meeting and said, something no one expected, I want to ask you something. If someone finally acknowledges your strength, does it heal the past? Or does it simply change the future? I arrived early. Earlier than usual. Not because I was nervous. Because I wanted control. Control over how it felt. Control over how I walked past her. Control over whether I acknowledged her as mother. Or employee. The elevator doors opened onto the 12th floor at 8:41 a.m. She was already there. Sitting upright at her assigned desk. New badge clipped carefully to her blazer. Hair pulled back more tightly than usual. Focused. She didn't see me at first. She was reviewing onboarding paperwork. For a second, I just watched. Not with superiority. With distance. 6 years ago, she had looked at me in a cap and gown and questioned my ambition. Now she sat inside a structure I built. Not as punishment. As reality. Rachel noticed me first. Morning, Danielle. My mother looked up. Our eyes met. There was a flicker there. Not embarrassment, awareness. Good morning, she said. Professional. Measured. Morning, I replied. The air didn't crack. It didn't tremble. It just adjusted. Throughout the morning, I heard her voice occasionally. Confident, organized. She wasn't struggling. She had always been competent. What she had underestimated was scale. Around noon, I walked into the break room. She was there alone, stirring sugar into coffee. When she saw me, she didn't stiffen. She didn't look defensive. She just looked thoughtful. Is it overwhelming? I asked lightly. She shook her head. No. Pause. It's impressive. That word carried weight. Impressive. Not average. Not safe. Impressive. I leaned against the counter. You always liked order, she said. I always liked responsibility. She studied me carefully. I didn't see how far that would take you. You didn't want to. That wasn't accusation. It was clarity. She didn't argue. I thought pushing you would make you tougher, she said. It made me quiet. That landed. She nodded slowly. I see that now. Silence settled between us. Not tense. Not unresolved. Just honest. I called you mediocre, she said quietly. Yes, I was wrong. 3 words. Direct, not wrapped in justification. Not diluted. I was afraid. She continued. Lucas struggled, and I needed someone to be certain. So I became certainty. Yes, and you resented it. She swallowed. I think I did. The admission felt heavier than any apology. Because resentment isn't easy to confess. You built something I didn't predict, she said. I built it because you didn't. That wasn't sharp. It was structural. She exhaled softly. I should have celebrated you. Yes, and I didn't. No. She looked down at her coffee. I'm sorry. There it was. Not in an email. Not typed safely from a distance. Spoken, in a room where I held authority. And yet, I didn't feel powerful. I felt balanced. Before I tell you what happened 3 months later, when she stood in my office during a company-wide meeting and said something no one expected, I want to ask you something. If someone finally acknowledges your strength, does it heal the past? Or does it simply change the future? 3 months later, the quarterly operations meeting was standing room only. Glass walls, polished table, 27 department heads. I stood at the front of the room, slides behind me, projections steady. Revenue up 18%. Operational efficiency improved 11%. Employee retention at an all-time high. I spoke calmly, not loudly, not theatrically, just clearly. Halfway through the presentation, the doors opened quietly. My mother stepped in. She wasn't late. She had been coordinating documents downstairs and came up to deliver updated vendor reports. She paused near the back wall, watching, listening. No one else in the room knew she was my mother. She was just another employee. And for the first time in my life, she saw me in full context. Not as daughter. Not as comparison. Not as contrast to Lucas. As leader. When I finished, Mr. Dalton nodded. Well done, Danielle. Applause filled the room. Not dramatic. Professional, earned. As people began filing out, my mother remained standing, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. When the room cleared, she stepped forward. I didn't know, she said quietly. Know what? That you were this steady. The word steady didn't sting anymore. It felt anchored. I said. You just thought steady meant small. She nodded. I thought big had to look loud, and I don't. No, she said softly. You never did. She placed the vendor folder on the table. I've been watching you manage conflict, she continued. You don't dominate, you structure. That observation meant more than applause. I wish I had structured you differently, she added. There it was, the admission. Not that she pushed, but how? You structured me to survive, I said. And you built something with it. Silence. Lucas is finally stabilizing, she said. I know. He respects you now. I don't need that. No, she replied. But he does. The reversal was subtle, not vindictive, not humiliating, just reality. For years, I had chased her approval quietly. Now I didn't need it. And because I didn't need it, it arrived differently. That afternoon, she asked if we could have dinner. Just us. Not family. Not comparison. Just conversation. At dinner, she said something that rewrote more than I expected. I used to think strength looked like noise, she said. Now I know it looks like discipline. That was the moment I realized something important. Her apology wasn't about guilt. It was about growth. Before I tell you what happened on the 6th anniversary of my graduation, and the framed photo she handed me that replaced an old memory, I need to ask you something. If someone finally grows, do you let yourself soften? 6 years to the day after my graduation, my mother asked me to meet her at the campus fountain. The same fountain. Same courtyard. Same late May sunlight. I hadn't been back since that day. I almost said no. Not because I was bitter. Because I wasn't sure I wanted to stand in that memory again, but I went. She was already there when I arrived. Standing exactly where she had stood before, hands folded in front of her. Holding something, a frame. For a second, I couldn't breathe normally. The past has a way of folding into the present without warning. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't heavy, it was steady. I walked closer. The fountain water caught sunlight the same way it had 6 years ago. I thought this place deserved a different memory, she said quietly. She handed me the frame. Inside it was a photograph. From my graduation, not the one posted online. Not the one where I was angled beside Lucas. Not the one where she had adjusted my cap and whispered, not to waste it. This one was different. It was just me. Standing alone. Diploma in hand. Head tilted slightly upward. Proud. Centered, uncropped. I found it in my phone. She said. I never shared it. I stared at it longer than I expected to. Because I remembered that exact second, that exact breath, the moment before she spoke. The moment I still believed she saw me clearly. I was wrong that day, she said. No justification. No elaboration. Just truth. You weren't mediocre. The word landed softly this time. I was afraid you'd choose something smaller, she continued. I didn't. No, she said. You chose something different. Silence, birds moving across the grass. Students laughing nearby. Life continuing around us. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd become exceptional, she said. You did push me. I just didn't know I was pushing you away. That sentence carried weight, because pushing doesn't always create strength. Sometimes it creates distance. I built myself anyway, I said quietly. You did, and I shouldn't have had to prove it. She nodded. You shouldn't have. She stepped closer. You don't owe me forgiveness. I'm not holding resentment. That was the surprising part. I wasn't. The word failure had driven me, but it hadn't defined me. You changed, I said. I learned. She looked at the fountain. At work, she added, I watch how you handle mistakes. I glanced at her. You don't embarrass people. No, I don't. You correct them privately. You protect their dignity. I remember what it feels like not to have that. She swallowed. I'm sorry I didn't protect yours. That was the sentence. Not, I'm proud of you. Not you proved me wrong. But that, I'm sorry I didn't protect yours. It didn't erase the past, it reframed it. 6 years earlier, she had defined me publicly. Now she restored me privately. I placed the framed photo back in her hands. Keep it, I said. She blinked. Why? Because I don't need it to remember who I was. I paused. I just need you to. Her eyes softened. I do. We stood there for a moment. Not dramatic. Not cinematic, just steady. Growth isn't loud, it's consistent. And sometimes redemption isn't a grand gesture. It's a parent finally saying, I see you. So tell me if someone once called you a failure, and later stood in your world asking to learn from you. Would you harden? Or would you allow growth? Because strength doesn't just build companies, it builds perspective. If this story felt close to something you've lived, if you've ever turned someone's doubt into discipline, subscribe. And tell me the city you're watching from. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is success with grace. I'll see you in the next story.